Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Kush Kumar Gayase. I teach political science in the Department of Political Science at JDMC, Janaki Devi Memorial College, University of Delhi. Today's lecture will be on India and its neighbors. So let's begin. So as the topic suggests, India and its neighbors, we'll be seeing first of all the structure of today's lecture. So today's lecture, first of all, we'll see India and its neighbors. We'll try to locate India and its neighbors on maps. We'll also see some sample questions. We'll see introducing the relations with neighbors, that how we introduce the relations with neighbors, whatever the neighbors we'll be seeing. And then towards the end, we'll see the assessment of relations, that how India's relations are basically with South Asian countries. And particularly, we'll also see that how India has been approaching South Asia overall. Next slide. So in the introduction, as we can see that what is a neighbor? What do we mean by a neighbor? So once we see the immediate environment and surrounding and vicinity, and that's what we understand by neighbors. Why understanding geopolitical relationship is important? It is important because of these following reasons. For example, geography as a determining factor, historical context. It also tells about economic interdependence. It also tells about security and strategic interest. It also tells us cultural and social dynamics within a region. And therefore, geopolitics is quite important for any country. And that's why we understand the relationships, and that becomes very important. Next, we have what is the importance of studying relationship with neighbors. It is important for some of the reasons like regional stability and security. For any country, it is essential to have a regional stability and security. Next, we have economic cooperation and trade. For any country who would like to have a very good relationship in terms of economic and trade sense, it is very, very significant that it must have a very good relationship with its neighbors. Next, we have cultural and social exchanges. These days, these factors have become quite important as in terms of even soft power for any country. And that's why, again, when it comes to neighborhood, the cultural and social exchanges are quite significant. Next, we have resolution of conflicts and disputes. It is essential to have conflicts with neighbors, as we can see anywhere in the world. And therefore, once we understand the neighborhood and the neighbors and the relationship between them, we would understand how to resolve certain problems, certain conflicts and disputes. Then it is also important diplomatic and influence and alliances cases. And therefore, importance of studying relationship becomes even more important in the days when we have diplomatic channels which are becoming very, very relevant for resolving conflicts. Now, if you go to the background of this topic, India and its neighbors, we'll see that particularly India, when we talk about this South Asian subcontinent, we see that in this subcontinent, the colonial legacy has determined the relationship. If you talk about India-Pakistan, if you talk about India-Bangladesh, India-Sri Lanka, you'll see that somewhere this colonial legacy has impacted the relationships. For example, during the British rule, the borders were shaped in such a way that a lot of things are becoming even now quite complicated, and we're still struggling with that. Next, we see neo-imperialism, the great power ambitions, be it China or US, they have ambitions in this region. And therefore, whenever the external actors, they come to the region and then they try to establish contacts with the neighboring countries, a country like India would be bothered because it too has ambitions to become a major power, a superpower in the future. And therefore, these superpowers or great powers who are in the international system, they also influence our relationship with our neighbors. Next, we have huge differences in size and capacity. So when we understand the neighborhood policy or India's relationship with neighbors, we need to understand that India is the biggest country here. It's the big boy. And therefore, this big brother sometimes causes insecurity. And that's what we see, the huge differences in size and capacity. Issues with the leadership. Sometimes the leaders could be different. Different leaders have different policies. And so with the different countries. So sometimes a leader can be democratic, a leader can be somebody who is coming from literary background, or maybe somebody is sort of autocratic. And therefore, we have different times, different leaders in this region, and therefore that also complicates the relationships. Now, then we have domestic issues, etc. Sometimes domestic issues also shape the relationships. Now, let's understand briefly the overview of India's geographical location. Because when we understand or try to understand the relationship with our neighbors, we need to understand where we are located, where we are situated exactly. And that way we see is situated this subcontinent, is Indian subcontinent that is often referred to as South Asian Peninsula. We are surrounded by water on three sides: the Arabian Sea to the west, the Bay of Bengal to the east, and the Indian Ocean to the south. Mind it that this strategic maritime location has historically influenced our trade, our commerce, our cultural relationships with different countries. In the north, we see Himalayan range that has always protected in a way, that has remained sort of guardian. Different geographical features, including plains, be it plateaus or mountains or even rivers or deserts, they've all played very important role when it comes to India's central location in South Asia, and that gives it a pivotal role to regional geopolitics. So with this, we can now move to this map. So let's see that if you look at the map, where India is exactly located. So we have our neighboring countries in such a huge planet, Earth, where you have so many continents, and there is one subcontinent, here it is South Asia, and there you have India and its neighbors. Once we look at the map, we understand that how complex the relationships can be. Now, perhaps this map can show us a better picture, so we can see that within Asia now, we can see these countries, and then the ocean body, and then we can see our landlocked borders, then we can see the neighbors who are having maritime boundaries with us. Now, sometimes in the examination point of view, that if you understand, certain questions are asked, such as discuss India's relations with its neighbors. Has it been playing the role of a big brother in its neighborhood? Evaluate. So we have only 50 words, and then you have to comprehend this. So towards the end of the lecture, we'll be trying to understand that how we can approach these questions. Secondly, discuss the core elements of India's neighborhood first policy, how far this policy remains India's foreign policy priority. Analyze. So towards the end, we'll be trying to solve this. Now, let's understand the borderline names. Sometime even in prelims exams or some objective MCQs type question that you face certain questions, and these facts are quite important in that sense. So, for example, India Pakistan, the border name is Radcliffe Line. Then you have Bangladesh, there you have Purbanchal. Then you have China, the McMahon Line belongs to there. And then Bhutan, India-Bhutan border, simply Afghanistan. You can also see that the length of these borders, so the maximum length and the minimum length, that you can see what India shares with its neighbors. Next. So let's see that we do have India's maritime neighbors as well. So what we have seen in the previous slide, that we have some landlocked neighbors, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So including Afghanistan, we have 7 neighbors. Those are landlocked. Those touches our land boundaries. Now when we see these 3 countries, with them we don't share any land boundary, we share with them maritime boundary, that is, we are connected with water bodies, and that is India and Sri Lanka, India and Maldives, and then India and Indonesia. If you remember Andaman and Nicobar in the map, you can understand that even India and Indonesia are neighbors in a way, that too maritime neighbors. Now, look at the map again. As you can see that we have Indonesia right here, then we have Sri Lanka right here, we have Maldives, and then we have land-related neighbors such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, China, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar. Now let's go to the next slide. Recently, you can see this, the change has taken place now. We have 2 union territories, so that's why I wanted to show you that these are no longer states. It's basically union territories of India after this division, because that determines India-Pakistan relationship. So when we understand South Asia or India's relations with its neighbors, it's important to understand this. Now, let's understand India's policy towards South Asia. Because before we understand India and its neighborhood, we need to understand how India has approached South Asia as a whole, and therefore with each neighbors. So first of all, we see India's foreign policy in South Asia is characterized by a mix of regional cooperation, economic engagement, and diplomatic initiatives. We also had no unified policy towards South Asia, mostly based on historical contingency and specific contexts. So sometimes, according to the situation, we have perhaps since the past we have reacted. So India's policy in South Asia can be seen in different phases. So maybe at some phase of time, we see that there used to be no unified policy, mostly based on historical contingency. So whatever the issues we were facing, accordingly we were reacting or behaving in terms of our neighbors. Now the Nehru's, Panchsheel and Nam, that used to be a very important character because during the Nehru era we see that non-aligned movement and Panchsheel, that the doctrine between India and China, that became the benchmark of our policy towards South Asia or with our neighbors in general. Then we see Indira's doctrine when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, and then we see neighbors' territory not to be used by other powers. So that was quite a strong stance, and that we see some sort of shift towards our policy towards our neighbors. Later we see Gujral doctrine in 1996 when Indra Kumar Gujral, he was the Prime Minister. So in Gujral doctrine there is a non-reciprocity that relationship will see. Vajpayee's composite dialogue with Pakistan. So, when the BJP government, the NDA, basically led by Prime Minister Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he had basically initiated a composite dialogue because he understood that Pakistan is one of the most important neighbors India has, and unless and until we have a good relationship with Pakistan, or at least a stable relationship with Pakistan, India just cannot really use South Asia as a launching pad. And therefore, Vajpayee had a different sort of policy around then. Now we see the shift in policy over the last few years, particularly when we talk about the current the government, we see that neighborhood first policy became a trademark, where bilateral and multilateral diplomacy became a very important feature. SAARC, for example. Next, we have economic cooperation and connectivity. There we have more initiatives like Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. Similarly, we have BIMSTEC, where we have Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. We also have security and counter-terrorism collaborations with different countries. We have cultural diplomacy and people-to-people contact. So this has been the shift that we can see during the recent times. Now we can start with the country-wise relationships. First of all, we have the most important relation with India and Pakistan relations. There we see three different aspects of relationship. First of all, we'll see historical context, we'll see key issues and conflicts, and then we'll see current status. Due to paucity of time, that I would not be able to explain all the points, but then definitely the effort would be to give you a structure of relations between India and Pakistan, so that in the examination, if you have to at all attempt, then at least you touch upon these points which will help you to elaborate the relationship between India and Pakistan. So first of all, we have historical context, that is partition of British India. So first of all, 1947, we all know that India got independence, and then we also see the partition between these two countries. Now we see Kashmir conflict that is coming out of that India-Pakistan relations. We have India-Pakistan wars taking place, 1947, 1965, 1971, and then a proxy war we see in 1999. Similarly, we see diplomatic efforts and agreements in between. Cooperation also we have seen, that is Shimla Agreement in 1972 after that war of 1971, and then we see the Lahore Declaration in 1999 after this, what we see that Kargil war. And then we see terrorism and proxy warfare that is going on even now, that we see often. What are the key issues and conflicts between India and Pakistan? When it comes to that, the most important issue, what we see, that Kashmir issue, that has still been claimed by the Pakistan, and then of course the India has its own stand, and India has been fighting for this. And you have seen that Pakistan occupied Kashmir is still with Pakistan, that has to be resolved with diplomatic channels and different means. So that remains a very important issue between these two countries. The border conflict that is still going on, there are certain unresolved issues that needs to be dealt with. 1971 creation of Bangladesh, definitely, as you know, it used to be is called East Pakistan, and after 1971, the creation of Bangladesh has given more bitterness when it comes to Pakistan looking at India. Now, the water treaty has remained, again, Indus Valley Water Treaty particularly, though it was resolved with international efforts and all, but still there are certain issues which can be looked upon. Terrorism, that we still see often in newspapers, that how terrorist activities are taking place in the territory of Pakistan, and then from there they are operating inside Indian territory. We see nuclear weapons, as we all know, during Pokhran test, India first went ahead with nuclear tests, and then we see Pakistan also following that, and therefore now the nuclear weapons are very serious threat between these two countries. Later we see that wars that has taken place in the past, that is still somehow painful for both the countries to digest. Next, we can see this map, that how the boundaries are so connected, that has really caused a lot of trouble between India and Pakistan, and then India is still trying to resolve that. Next country we can see that Afghanistan. It's a very important country, though it's not very close to India, but yes, the border touches here, as you can see India, and right here that Afghanistan border is touching, and therefore Afghanistan becomes a very, very important country for India. As you know, the Kautilya is a very popular statement that Ari Ari Mitra. So we know that the Pakistan is not friendly to us, and then therefore Afghanistan is not friendly to Pakistan, and therefore India and Afghanistan have potential to be friends, and they have been friends in many ways, as we can see in the next slide. Afghanistan, this long landlocked country located in Central Asia, the people of both India and Afghanistan have historical connections through trade. We have some art exchanges also, cultural exchanges also in the past also, and then even now during Taliban regime also is still trying to make it better. India provides humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan and also helps in establishing education centers, hospitals, and other amenities. We are building infrastructure also. Afghanistan has seen the hotbed of Islamic extremists like Taliban and Islamic terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. Yet, we see some issues, political turmoil. Relationship between India and Afghanistan has been of security and strategic importance. The recent trends, we can see that after the Taliban has approached Afghanistan, and now India is really wanting to reconnect with the country and trying to making it better when it comes to India-Afghanistan relations. In fact, India has invested in the development of the Chabahar port in Iran, which serves as a gateway for Indian goods to reach Afghanistan and Central Asia. So India is still having its own roadmap to how to again connect with Afghanistan and make the relationship better. Here you can see this. The next slide is about Nepal. So India-Nepal relations, this is the next country that we have. We again have historical connections, we have some recent issues, and then we have cultural relationship with this country. So Kingdom of Nepal, a landlocked country, again, it is bounded on the north by Tibet, that is China, and then India on all the other sides. So it's a buffer state basically, so that's why Nepal remains a very important country for India. The state religion is Hindu, and therefore Hinduism, and therefore India and Nepal share deep-rooted historical and cultural ties marked by common religious beliefs, traditions, and people-to-people interactions. Cross-border trade, transit agreements, and joint infrastructure projects contribute to economic ties. So we do have economic relationship also quite well. India and Nepal border has been a subject of historical disputes, though. Despite periodic tensions, diplomatic efforts are made to resolve these issues. Diplomatic relations between India and Nepal have witnessed fluctuations, though, influenced by geopolitical dynamics and domestic politics. That is, the government in Nepal, they would not be supporting Indian government, and at the same time, the external powers such as China would be influencing policy of Nepal's government towards India. So therefore, both conflict and cooperation we have seen, border crossings, trade, human trafficking, China factor, these are main issues that you can discuss. Particularly China factor remains very important, because as much as China is there in Nepal, it's going to be difficult for India to expand its influence in the South Asian region and beyond. Next we see Bhutan. As you can see in the map, the Bhutan is right here between, again, you have China and India. And if you remember the Dokulam in 2018, that is exactly the tri-junction right here where China and India came face to face. And that's why Bhutan remains very important. We have wonderful relationship with Bhutan. We can divide it into historical friendships, strategic ties, and then we can also put it in shared cultural aspects. Again, Buddhism is the dominant religion, so we have some connections in terms of Buddhism as well. India and Bhutan shares a long-standing and deep-rooted friendship. As we know, hydropower projects are quite important, as it is there between the mountains, and therefore, Indo-Bhutan Treaty of friendship of August 1949 is the base of the relationship. Bhutan agrees to seek the advice of the government of India with regards to its foreign relations, but remains free to decide whether or not to accept such advice. Doklam conflict, as I have mentioned, so that brought the importance of Bhutan for us. Why important for India? Bhutan's strategic alignment with India contributes to a regional balance of power, and both nations work together on regional and international platforms, therefore. The next important country we have is Myanmar, and as you can see in the picture, Myanmar is quite close to our northeastern states, and that's why it is also the gateway for India to reach out to South Asia and Southeast Asia, and that's Southeast Asia and East Asia. And therefore, we see the Burma, that is also that Myanmar that we see, it is important for India. India's approach to the Rohingyas crisis, as we have seen in the newspapers recently, and its cooperation with Myanmar in managing the situation is a significant aspect for bilateral relations. Aung San Suu Kyi, that we know the winner of Nobel Peace Prize, India has been supporting the democratic movement in Myanmar. So the relationship is quite dynamic in terms of economic cooperation between India and Myanmar. That has been a focus area with initiatives such as the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project and the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway. These are the important initiatives that we can see in recent years. India-Myanmar border is a source of historical and ongoing disputes also. That's one of the issues that we face. Insurgent groups, particularly from northeastern India, have at times found refuge in Myanmar. So that is something to be really worried about. India has shown interest in Myanmar's energy resources, particularly natural gas, with investments in exploration and production projects. Again, the China factor remains very important here because China is again trying to establish its foothold, and that is again concerning India. Bangladesh. It remains one of the most, again, important neighbors of India. As you can see, is once again is quite close to Indian states, and it is also one of the fastest economies that we see in the region, and therefore the relationship remains very important. When we talk about India-Bangladesh relations, then we have to see that liberation war and historical ties. We also can see trade and economic relations. We can see water sharing agreements. These are important points we can discuss under this. So India facilitated creation of Bangladesh in 1971, as we have discussed that India and Pakistan war in 1971, and then the liberation, that movement, and therefore the emergence of Bangladesh as a separate country. How was the relationship between India and Bangladesh? 1971 to 75, we see some. So different phases have different relationships, sometimes cordial, sometimes sour, sometimes fluctuations. But overall, initiatives such as the India-Bangladesh Protocol on land water transit and trade have facilitated smoother cross-border trade and transport. The land boundary agreement, particularly in 2015, resolved long-standing border issues between India and Bangladesh. Again, issues between India and Bangladesh remains there. For example, the Tista river water sharing, migrants and border security issues, land boundary disputes, trade imbalances. These are still matter of concern. And of course, not to forget about China factor. Once again, is Bangladesh. So Chittagong is the another place where China is trying to establish its foothold, and India is concerned with that. Now, the next country we have, two countries we can take, is Sri Lanka and Maldives. As you can see in the map, Maldives and Sri Lanka, both they are maritime neighbors, but very, very important for India. As we can see about India-Sri Lanka relations, historical context, economic conflict and peace efforts, and economic cooperation, the main issues that we have here. Ethnic conflicts affect relations. As we see the Tamil cause, a lot of Tamil population is Sri Lanka, and therefore it has been the issue there. As you can see, India peacekeeping forces in 1987-90, India sends due to LTT issues. Then we see the LTT suicide bombing killing Rajiv Gandhi in 1991. The state politics of India is sometimes also causing tensions, such as a lot of political parties would like to bring up this Tamil cause, and therefore the government has to make certain policies, certain amendments sometimes, and that causes concern in Sri Lankan government. And therefore we see the ethnic issues remain at the core of the problem, but at the same time these days what we see is China factor is again becoming very important. So one of the three issues that we can discuss is Tamil issues of fishermen. Sometimes fishermen are caught or they are killed also because they somehow cross maritime boundaries. Hambantota port by China is very, very important in recent times because it is concerned for India that China is going to land its ships now there in Hambantota port, and therefore China is going to be in the Indian Ocean. That is called India's backyard. And therefore, China factor in Sri Lanka again remains a very concerning element when it comes to India-Sri Lanka relations. Maldives, once again, as we see that the same issues with Maldives, particularly in recent times, it has been in news that the Maldives, it has experienced periods of political instability and issues related to governments and political tensions, transitions. India and the Maldives share historical and cultural ties that have been strengthened over the years. So though we have a wonderful relationship with Maldives, and India has been helping Maldives also at many point of time, but recent trends what we see that the Maldives growing ties with China, particularly in terms of infrastructure and development and economic cooperation, it has been a point of concern for India. And recent times that issues such as piracy, illegal fishing, and ensuring maritime domain awareness require cooperation, but differences in approaches can lead to tension. Recent times we have seen that during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Lakshadweep, and then some inappropriate comments by some of the officials in Maldives that has caused tensions. And again, somehow we feel that the China factor could be behind it, and therefore the Maldivian the government, they are pro-China. At this moment, it appears to be, and that is something that India needs to deal with. So that defines the relationship at this moment between India and Maldives right now. Now, the last that neighbor we have is the China, and China remains one of the most, in fact, the most important neighbor for India when it comes to India becoming a rising power. So you can see the map that how China's the geography is, and in terms of India and how they can influence each other. So when we talk about China, India-China relations, the three most important again aspects can be seen as historical background, border disputes, economic ties, and current status. Within that, we can see that background relations. Oldest civilizations, both India and China, they have been very old civilizations. They have cultural, religious, and trade links. As you know, Buddhism has expanded in China, originated in India. Therefore, the fluctuations in relationships also we have seen, ranging from Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai slogan in 1950s, and then to armed conflict in the 1960s, the 1962 war that India had to face. Strategic distances, therefore, in 1970s. Efforts for normalization by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1980s. Then after 1990s, search for a new relationship based on conflict resolution, confidence building, and cooperative arrangements in different years. Now, we see the core issues. What is the core issue between India and China? That's the border dispute issue that we see between India and China. Western sectors, particularly that claims of a supply chain that is almost resolved now. But what we have is mostly is that Western sector and this Eastern sector where we have claims on large part of Arunachal Pradesh. Spiritual angle is there, Dalai Lama's issues. Hydroelectric port is called that region, and therefore China would like to grab it, and therefore fertile land as well, and these are the issues which make it very, very crucial for India and China. Now, the trade dispute, though it does not seem very important, yet it is very important because of the trade deficit. Though we have more than 1 billion trade between India and China, yet the trade dispute is there because the trade is mostly in the favor of China than India. And that, as we can see in the fact here, that last year the India-China bilateral trade hit a record high of over 125 billion, crossing the USD 100 billion mark in a year when the relations touched a new low due to standoff by the militaries in eastern Ladakh that we have seen during the COVID phase. The reasons, internal and external, that can be discussed in detail. Water sharing issues again is there, water hegemony, Brahmaputra river belt issue, because in China would like to have the maximum water from Brahmaputra river, but this is also important for India, and therefore that remains another issue between India and China. The other issues that we can talk about is One Belt, One Road initiative. These are very important issues because it's often in examinations asked these days. It's a very recent phenomenon also you can say. There are two components of these One Belt and One Road issue. One is Belt Road Initiative, second is Maritime Road Initiative. So it has two components, Indian Ocean and South China Sea, they are there, and then string of pearls concept, where China is trying to have maximum infrastructure built in different countries in the Indian Ocean region, be it Maldives, be it Pakistan, be it Bangladesh, be it Sri Lanka. And these are basically the infrastructure ports, they are called pearls. So that's why this string of pearls is the chain of these infrastructure in the Indian Ocean which China is planning to build and is already building, and therefore it's a serious concern for India. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) is another concern for India because China is building infrastructure in the region, that's Karakoram region in the north, and therefore it is important issue. India's membership, that is in the United Nations, then or be it nuclear suppliers group, which China is somehow objecting, that is again important concern for India and problematic for India-China relations. Then we see China-Pakistan all with a friendship because Pakistan is being supported by China all the time, and therefore it is major of concern for India. And it's another stumbling block for a good relationship between India and China. As you can see in the map, that string of pearls, these are the the pearls that you can say, or you can talk about these island countries, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, or even Pakistan. Pakistan, where the Gwadar port is being built, and this is another concern for India because China is wanting to go to in West Asia all the way from Karakoram, that's China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, to Pakistan to West Asia. Now, let's conclude now. So, towards the end, we can see that what is happening at this moment when it comes to India and its neighbors, how India is approaching its neighbors. So, what we have seen that India's policy towards its neighbors, it can be categorized into three overlapping phases. The first phase we have seen, the Nehruvian phase, which treated the region for the viewpoint of an internationalist, a mix of realism and idealism. India had got independence, and Prime Minister Nehru wanted to look beyond this region and therefore assimilate India's influence or expand India's presence, and also give a very clear message to the world that India is for all those values, and therefore we see a mix of realism and idealism in Nehruvian policy. Then we see interventionist approach in the second phase that gave preference to India's policy over the region and tried to shape policy accordingly. That those were the bold measures to secure India's strategic interests, be it in 1971, the war that we have seen with India and Pakistan, that is creation of East Bangladesh, or going to Sri Lanka or going to Maldives in 1980s, or the third phase that we see accommodative to the demands of neighbors. So now we are somehow being more accommodative to neighbors. We are trying to reach out to neighbors so that India can somehow get along with its neighbors and establish a good relationship. So what is neighborhood first policy? That's what India has started now. India's neighborhood first policy is about focuses on improving ties with India's immediate neighbors. So that's what we are doing now, being an important power or a strong power in the region. Inviting all heads of state, as we have seen, heads of government of South Asia when the Prime Minister Modi was taking his first oath. Prime Minister Modi also made his first foreign visit to Bhutan, such a small country, and yet it was important for Prime Minister. India invited BIMSTEC leaders, Prime Minister Modi foreign visit in his second term. All these gives very good indication that India has now gone for a neighborhood first policy. Then we have a Sagar doctrine, security and growth for all in the region, as we have seen overboard by China. During COVID times, we have been quite instrumental. We have given vaccines to our neighbors, and we have prioritized them, and that makes India quite significant in the region and its relationships. Now, when we conclude it, we see some common challenges we have, but we also have some opportunities, like common issues faced by India and its neighbors. Like terrorism we have, climate change we have a lot of non-traditional security threats in the region, we have natural calamities, disaster issues we have. So we can have, together we can fight against these issues. Then we have opportunities for regional cooperation as well. So therefore we have a lot of platforms, for example, SAARC, BIMSTEC, etc. We also have some regional organizations like, as I said, SAARC and BIMSTEC. India's role in regional cooperation could be quite instrumental. So in a nutshell, we can say India's neighborhood policy, or India and its neighbors, this has seen different shifts during different phases, but definitely if India would like to be, or India aspires to be a major power, as an important power, and in order to become an important power, a major power in the international system, what India needs to do is that use South Asia as a launching pad, and it is possible only when South Asia is a stable region for India. So that's all about India and its neighbors. Thanks for watching. Thank you.